Durham's Nothing But Truth.
Welcome back, Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth. On the flip side of the break, we'll be speaking with Jim Hoff, the Gateway Pundit. You see, I'm not only going to criticize the mainstream media, I'm not only going to criticize the problems, I'm going to actually put forth a solution. I think we all have a responsibility to do that. It's not because I'm, Crane Durham, there it is. No, I review these things, I address the narrative, I point it out, there are things I'm skilled at, yeah, great. But we also have an obligation not only to criticize, but to solve. And that's what's good about what's going on now, because there are solutions. And part of the solution is getting in touch with a guy like Pete Sepp, Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union. He is a man who I would welcome on the Sunday shows. Not many liberals would want him there. And here's why. Pete, welcome.
Great to be here.
Great to be with you. You're celebrating our nation's birth. I'm jazzed about it. Coming up, sharing memories on the Facebook. And yet I think to myself, what would the founders think of our tax code today?
Well, I found an interesting quote in the Federalist 35. This was Alexander Hamilton's work. It's a little bit of a long quote, but I'll read it quickly. Quote, "There is no part of the administration of government that requires extensive information and a thorough knowledge of the principles of political economy so much as the business of taxation. The man who understands those principles best will be least likely to resort to oppressive expedients or sacrifice any particular class of citizens to the procurement of revenue. It might be demonstrated that the most productive system of finance will always be the least burdensome." How many members of Congress do you think understand those principles today? I can't imagine more than a handful who both understand and truly apply them in their daily work. And so the founders would be pretty upset.
And they understood that because they understood people act in their own self-interest. And they realized that as long as we had federalism in the place where people can move to state, they could step out of the oppression in one state that they view and go someplace else. But they realized the extreme dangers of a federal government extending its power. And that's why they were interested in limiting it. What has the tax code shown us about our government's ability to limit their own power?
Absolutely. The problem is when a government gets a power to tax, especially the power to tax incomes, the growth of government naturally follows. Take a look at when the federal income tax on individuals was ratified through the 16th Amendment. We had income taxes before then. One of them was struck down. Another was a Civil War expedient that was later abolished. But once it came into effect, from the first tax year 1913 return up to today, federal receipts overall have grown by more than 175,000%. There are other factors, of course, in the growth of government. The fact that we set aside the enumerated powers clause of the Constitution, that plays a role in it. But the money machine provided by the income tax really allowed government to take off and expand its powers into virtually every facet of our daily lives. It also enabled things like withholding that came about as a wartime expedient measure. In 1942, it was invented by a guy who was an official with, I believe, a Federal Reserve Bank, but he was also an executive at Macy's. And he recognized if you take people's money in bits and pieces and call it something that's being done for their convenience, they'll fall for it more than if you presented them with a big bill every time at the end of the year.
So they understand how it works and how to continue and lock it in. And here we are today, 60% plus of our budget dedicated to entitlements. Yes, some people have paid in, obviously, but they, on average, get paid out a lot more when we're talking Social Security and Medicare. The other part to that is 18 to 22% spent on defense. That gets more proportionally taken out of it when it comes to a deal, yet it's our government's first responsibility to protect us. So my question is this, Pete, solve the problem. Tell me how you're going to deal with entitlements and people every time you talk about cutting taxes, paying for a tax cut. How are you going to deal with reforming an entitlement system because we have people paying now, us paying for the people who are on it now? So how are you going to do that? How are you going to solve the problem when the answer is always coming back to, at least for those in Washington, many more money?
A few things. First, you've got to grow the economy much faster than we are now. That means a simplified tax system and one that doesn't put such a huge deadweight loss on the economy owing to its compliance. We're shelling out at least $240 billion with a B dollars a year just to deal with the tax laws, not to pay the taxes, but to commit the act of filing taxes. That's way too much overhead for a tax system. We then have to empower individuals to save more for their own retirement and health care, not only through the tax system, but increasing their wealth. As we do that, there will be less reliance on entitlement programs from the government in the future. But there's no way out of this that's easy. That's still going to mean a fair amount of sacrifice from this generation and ones to follow who simply cannot be able to pay for past mistakes and future mistakes at the same time. We're going to have to worry a little bit here about cutting back other forms of federal spending at the same time. That may include wasteful discretionary spending on the domestic side. We have to worry about Pentagon budgeting priorities too. Mm-hmm. But still, you're right, the main focus has to be entitlements because that's the main driver of future federal spending growth.
And part of that also, and I'm not trying to be Pollyannish here in my analysis, but I know when you increase freedom, you reduce costs. When you go more direct between the consumer provider, when you start going back and stop the artificial impact that the government or insurance is mandated to have, you start getting an actual price. At least, I believe Friedrich von Mises addresses that. I may be off. Bottom line,
yes,
is that true?
Absolutely.
More freedom, you're going to get lower costs because you're going to get a true cost.
Yes, absolutely. And when you restore the relationship between patient and provider in healthcare and get third parties out of the way, providing only catastrophic insurance, you also get a beneficial relationship that reduces costs. The existence of third-party providers in Medicare and Medicaid right now, that's really one reason why we face a $70 to $80 billion a year rate in improper payments between the two programs, may be headed to $100 billion by the time Obamacare is fully implemented.
I believe you would dismantle any leftist Keynesian within 3 minutes. And the reason I say that is not to patronize you, but actually to say that's how easy and clear it is. So the goal of those on the left, whether consciously or unconsciously, subconsciously, they are going to distort the argument. They're relying on that. And that means we've got to continue to hammer them with substance and speak up. And Pete, that's what you do at the National Taxpayers Union, don't you?
Well, we try our best, and we invoke the words of our founders like we did at the beginning of this segment because they had a lot of wisdom. They were informed themselves. They were not necessarily original thinkers in everything. They certainly came up with some great ideas, but they relied on others like Montesquieu, Cicero, many scholars about limited government and the need to have checks and balances. They understood that allowing the human spirit to flourish rather than government laws and mandates would make the country prosperous and make it sustainable over the long run.
Pete Sepp, Executive Vice President, National Taxpayers Union. I am trying to line up opponents for you, by the way, in the debate circle, because I can't wait. Pete, great to be with you. Have a wonderful 4th.
You do the same. Take care.
All right. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth. Jim Hoff on the flip side. AFR Talk.